Dear students, section C of American literature deals with drama. There are three playwrights prescribed for study. The first one is Eugene O'neill. Eugene O'Neill's Emperor Jones is there. The second playwright is Tennessee Williams. His Glass Menagerie is prescribed. Third playwright is Leroy Jones, an Afro-American playwright whose Dutchman is prescribed. American drama has come of age only in 19th century. Only in the last decades of 19th century. So we can very well say that American drama has come of age only in 20th century. That is before that there were no major dramatists. Eugene O'Neill was the first major dramatist who was also an experimental playwright. Along with Eugene O'Neill, we have Tennessee Williams also. Tennessee Williams also has experimented with the form of drama, and he has contributed much to the development of American drama. Leroy Jones is a poet, a novelist, and a playwright who has talked about racial issues. Eugene O'Neill was the foremost playwright of America in 20th century. He was a Nobel Prize winner, and he was awarded Pulitzer Prize for 3 times. It was said that Eugene O'Neill was literally born into theatre. His father was James O'Neill, the popular actor then. So he had a rich tradition of drama. He was born into a family of actors and playwrights. He was influenced by two major playwrights of 19th and 20th century, Henry Ibsen and August Strindberg. He wrote one-act plays and full-length plays. He had experimented with the form of drama. Till then, the traditional modes were used, but Eugene O'Neill tried to explore a different path. He wanted to express his own ideas in a new manner, in a novel manner. He wanted playwrights to explore the sickness of the day, or rather the malady of the times. And influenced by August Strindberg, he was also an expressionist. He was an expressionist playwright. Expressionists actually explored a new perception of reality. They rejected the photographic representation of life as such. In order to effectively express ideas, or in order to effectively reflect life, you have to find out some symbols. You have to find out some formula. So expressionist playwrights wanted to project in outer symbols a state of mind, an inner crisis, a psychological condition, etc. Expressionism was imported to America from Europe. It reached America from Europe, from Germany and other countries. So expressionist playwrights were influenced by August Strindberg. August Strindberg had written a prologue to his dream play. His dream play was a major one, and he wrote a prologue to the dream play. And in that prologue, he talks about imitation. A different kind of imitation. To imitate the disconnected but seemingly logical form of the dream. And according to August Strindberg, time and space do not exist. The characters split, double multiplicity, vanish solidly, blur, clarify, etc. And according to Strindberg, one consciousness reigns above them all, that of the dreamer, the consciousness of the dreamer. And before it, there are no secrets, no incongruities, no scruples, no laws. There is neither judgment nor exoneration, but merely narration. So this expressionism made positive contribution to American theatrical spirit. So it encouraged a remarkable variety of experiments, large and small. And O'Neill was a genius behind a change that came over American theater. He seemed capable of so many new ideas for the theater. He interpreted both realism and expressionism, and expressionist effects were first made noticeably a part of his drama in The Emperor Jones. And later he moved to bolder and more varied experiments in The Harriet, and he also wrote plays like The Great God Brown, etc., etc. And the hidden conflicts of the mind were explored by these playwrights. And the main theme of some of his plays, the major concern of some of his plays is frustration and desperation of American life and reality. Let us move on to the play Emperor Jones. It was a widely celebrated play. It was one of the major plays of 20th century. It could even be described as the magnum opus of Eugene O'Neill. He was concerned with the fundamental emotions and relationships of men. And his characters are not ladies and gentlemen of the polished world, but they are, the characters are people who are afflicted with primeval fears and concerns. So the play Emperor Jones can be interpreted as a study of panic and fear. And the panic and fear prevails among the half-civilized Negroes, the blacks. The play deals with the colorful and dramatic career of Jones. He was a former Pullman porter, and he was a Pullman porter in America for 10 years, and he killed his friend Jeff over a game of dice, and he was imprisoned, and he escaped from a prison. He fled away as a stowaway and came to the island, reached the island, the unnamed island in the West Indies. There he has made himself the absolute ruler. He was the self-declared ruler of the island. He claims that he is invulnerable to any but a silver bullet. And he robs the natives unmercifully. And after his looting has been completed, there is a rebellion in the offing. He flees the island, that is fully prepared for an uprising of the people he has tyrannized. He escapes to the tropical forest, as the sound of tom tom in the distance indicates that the revolt is gathering strength. The sound of tom tom, that sound, the sound of the drum or whatever it is, indicates that the revolt is gathering strength. But night has come sooner than he expected, and he loses his way in the forest. Several images, several symbols are used. A series of terrifying images are used in the play, and the playwright tries to show what's happening to the soul of man, except in the scene one of the play. We have, after the scene one, we have what you call the interior monologue of Brutus Jones. He flees the island, he loses his way, and his fears mount, and his mind reverts to his past, and not only his past, but the past of his race. So what happens is this, the violent past, he had a violent past, and he killed his friend Jeff, and he had or he has got an arch enemy, Lem. Lem was the leader of the rebels, but he escaped Lem, and then comes another character, Henry Smithers. Henry Smithers, a cockney trader, appears in the first scene of the play itself, and he happens to see a native woman, an old woman who is left alone. All other natives have escaped. All other natives have escaped. Expressionism became a theatrical movement after the First World War. O'Neill was deeply influenced by it, and Expressionism attempts to present a theme in a realistic style with a symbolic setting. And this play is made of a series of short scenes, and we have a series of short scenes in the play Emperor Jones. With the exception of the first and last scene, the play is in the mode of an interior monologue. The play is a monologue, and in the scene one we see Henry Smithers, a cockney trader. He finds all except one old native woman. All others have left, and the rebellion is on. And in this scene one, we see Brutus Jones, a very powerful emperor. He was exceptionally powerful, and everybody is afraid of him. And his throne is painted white, as powerful as the white people. And in the scene one, we see the racism of Smithers also. But when we come to the scene second, he has already moved on to the forest, and Smithers, and he has seen Smithers and Jones discuss an uprising, and he has already moved on to the forest, and he loses his way, and he happens to see a number of formless spheres, apparition, or something like that. That is what is seen here, and he shoots at the apparition, and he loses his first bullet. Apparition of Jeff comes later. Jeff, the black man whom he has killed, the his own friend. He had killed him, and the apparition of Jeff comes, and he was rather frightened, and he tries to shoot at that figure also. Whatever, all the things which are there in his mind, and he happens to, in thick darkness, he happens to have hallucination and all sorts of delusion and things like that. So after the first scene, the dusk of one afternoon and dawn on the following day, he is on the edge of the forest, and we have seen that a sustained dramatic monologue ensues, and we see John's in intense fear. And again, he happens to see some other apparition, some other ghostly figures, some other figures which frighten him, and he tries to shoot them, and also he shoots at them also, but he misses all those things. And towards the end, he shoots at the crocodile with a silver bullet and things like that. He loses his silver bullet also, and he earlier said that only with a silver bullet he can be conquered or something like that. Fear overtakes him, and he stumbles through the forest. He encounters little formless fears, the ghost of Jeff is, and again an African witch doctor. He learns nothing from the encounter, etc., etc. Towards the end, what we see is that he was caught by Lem, the leader of the rebels or the revolting people, and he was caught. And it was said that the natives shot him with it was narrated that the natives shot him with a silver bullet. That's how this play goes on. And like his other plays, only O'Neill makes use of what you call expressionist technique. Emperor Johns himself is a dual symbol here. First, he is a symbol of the Negro clamoring for freedom, and a slave seeking release from the burden of white man. On the one hand, we see that is a symbol of Negro clamoring for freedom, a slave seeking release from the burden of a white man. Secondly, is every man's soul aspiring for self-understanding. He is dark. His journeys through the forest is symbolic of Saul's quest towards self-realization and self-understanding. So a kind of a quest towards self-realization and self-understanding. The silver bullet is the symbol of the light that will provide salvation to the soul. In that way also it can be interpreted. Crudely speaking, the silver bullet is the symbol of that supposition by which the dishonest rich have made the world believe that their very riches could save them from the revenge of their victims. The silver bullet is also the symbol of white man's mask under which he works. He works under white man's mask. It's the symbol of his pride of release from bondage, the fetish of his particular pride. And the great forest in the play symbolizes the glory and horror of man's freedom. It also symbolizes his patience and sensuous isolation. And again, throughout the play, this particular beating of tom tom, the primitive kind of drum, beats in the camp of bush niggers to which Jones is helplessly drawn, and it beats in Jones's body also, and this beating represents the primitive blood which passes through his arteries. So the in Emperor John's we see the objectification of the contents of the character's haunted mind. It functions as a protracted symbol of fate in the shape of biological past. The madness of fear-obsessed Johns demonstrates that man is the sum not only of his own past experiences but those of the race. Not only his own past but the past of his race. That is based upon the assumption of a physical continuity between the ancestors and descendants. So that kind of a deeper interpretation of the play is also possible. It is also said that Jones is a symbol of man's vain boast of power. Is a symbol of man's vain boast of power. It's not a Negro, but a representative of humanity as such, with all the weakness and strengths of the sons of Adam. So that particular kind of a thing is there. On the one hand, at the beginning of the play, we see him on his heights. He is very, dominant. He is, trying to dominate over all the natives and things like that. He loots them, and he harasses them. He has taken away everything from there, and he claims that he has hidden many things in the forest, and he knows the forest very clearly. But what happens is that he loses his way. He is in utter darkness. He doesn't know what to do, or what to do as such. That kind of a thing is there. And also it is said that it's a sustained dramatic monologue. In scene 2, we find Jones in the grip of an intensely and extremely intensified fear complex. He's continuously talking to himself, sort of a monologue, interior monologue, and so to which he has become subject owing to moods and threatening beat of the tom-tom. That particular kind of a thing is there. In scene 3, we find a retrospective dramatic monologue in which Jones imagines he sees the ghostly figure of the Negro Jeff, whom he had killed in a skirmish. You know, Hallucinatory apparition conjured by the fevered brain of Jones. Fevered brain. He addresses it directly. Apparition. He addresses the apparition directly and tries to talk to it. Finally, not finding any response, he gets nervous and fires at the apparition with furious rage. The moment the smoke clears away, he finds that he's alone in the forest. And when we come to scene 4, he has another hallucinatory vision which makes him cry out to Lord Jesus. His guilty conscience plays an equally important role. He has the vision of the white prison guard who had whipped him across the back, etc. He addressed the figure at the guard directly and fires point blank at his back, etc. Scene 5, again there is the use of dramatic monologue. We see Jones praying to Lord Jesus in a repentant mood. Whatever he has done, his murder, his looting, his all those things. He has an hallucination, etc. In the company of the common slaves who are about to be auctioned. When they are auctioneer is in the act of picking him off, and the purchaser is in the act of paying for him. He all of a sudden gets out of hypnotic trance. That slave trade. There's reference to slave trade, etc. He was also following the path of the white masters. So that kind of a thing is also there in the 6th and 7th scenes. The dramatic monologue merges into some sort of interior monologue of the stream of consciousness. Like highly experimental technique is used here. The techniques used by James Joyce, Dorothy Richardson, and Virginia Woolf. All those techniques are used, by Eugene O'Neill here. Jones imagines that he has already been sold as a slave and finds himself on a board playing the oars like a common galley slave, etc. The pathetic fate of the slaves, etc. He also joins them. Lastly, in the 6th scene, the unconscious association in Jones' mind carry him to the original home of his ancestors, into the dark and dreadful jungles of Africa. So the doctor tells him that he must offer himself as a sacrifice in order to appease an angry, and so like that the play goes. So it's a sustained dramatic monologue, and O'Neill was influenced by the earlier dramatists and all, and it is also an expressionist play. He And Brutus Jones was a bold and brave exploiter who could enter into the forest alone. He could, but towards the end, what happens, we have seen. So there is irony in the play, etc., etc. That's all about the play Emperor Jones. Thank you, Anand. On to another experimental playwright, Tennessee Williams. He was born in 1911 and died in 1983. He was one of the major symbolist playwrights. He was influenced by Chekhov and Strindberg and others. Like Eugene O'Neill, he was also an expressionist playwright. He was influenced by Strindberg. Tennessee Williams is an innovator. He is an innovator, and he argued that the plays have a dream-like fragility, new conception of reality. He tried to kind of introduce a new conception of reality, and his is a new plastic theater, a kind of a plastic theater instead of the theater of realistic representation. Like Eugene O'Neill, he has also penetrated into the inner selves of the characters, and most of his plays depict the seamy side of American life, the capitalist, or rather, the 20th century American life, the modernist life, where people have lost all sorts of hope, and the kind of reality that existed in America after the depression and all. All human beings, they lead a kind of mechanical life. They are caught in a world of uncertainties, and they tried to, there is, and this general view of life is rather pessimistic, morbid, and tragic, and it is dark, and the world is, he tried to portray a world which is tormented by evil. And he once said that his politics is that heart, and he's only interested in human nature. And he considered theater as a kind of a religion. Theater, he was very much indebted to the theater, and he was a committed playwright in that sense. He completely devoted himself to theatrical activities. And talking about his drama, he considered theater as the purest form of religion. He tried to find solace in art. He was a real artist, a genuine artist, and his play, he had written a number of plays, like A Streetcar Named Desire is a very famous play written by Tennessee Williams, and along with that, Glass Menagerie, which was produced in 1945, was an instant success. It was an instant success, this particular play, and he has prefaced the play with explicit details of a set intended for conventional proscenium, or picture frame, or stage. When the curtain rises, the audience is confronted with a bare exterior wall of a brick tenement building. Williams describes these tenements as hive-like conglomerations of cellular living units. Look at the way in which he describes the houses, or hive-like conglomerations of cellular living units. And they are more fit for creatures rather than, but they are not. That kind of a thing is there. That is done for human beings. They are more fit for creatures or insects or something like that. This a deep personalization of man in a machine oriented society. He's talking about, in most of the plays, his major concern is depersonalization of man. Depersonalization of man in a machine oriented society. Uh, Bees are very efficient and well organized laborers, but they are not individuals. There are alleys running down both sides of this particular cell, etc. The only other exterior feature is fire escape, which serves as the entrance to the Wingfield apartment. Wingfield, we have three major characters in the play: Tom Wingfield, Amanda Wingfield, and Laura Wingfield. Others are also there, but they are the central characters of the play, and their house, or rather the place where they live, is described like that. When Tom is acting as a narrator, Tom Wingfield, he stands either downstage or at the footlights or in this fire escaping. So it can be described as a memory play, and it is not always necessary to have a realistic or naturalistic set. There are a few important pieces of furniture in the front room, in a sofa which pulls down into a bed for Laura, a table and a chair, and an old-fashioned stand on which Laura's glass menagerie is displayed, etc. So the only other features of the room are large framed photograph of Mr. Wingfield, and the lighting also is very important as far as the play is concerned. It's a symbolic play. It has got a symbolic setting. Laura should be given a special attention by the use of lighting, etc. So there is a suggestion of gaudy light sometimes. Music also is important as far as the play is concerned. Music narrator Paul Bowles was commissioned to write the music for this particular play, and uh, Williams wrote suggestively rather than literally. Certain elements of everyday life are omitted entirely, others are minimized, and still others exaggerated. And his method of writing is like this: a series of events presented not as they actually took place, but as they might be remembered. So he tries to kind of, reshape or redefine, or rather, remold reality. So that particular kind of, he is trying to give expression to the truth of human art. That is. So he followed the path of Strindberg and others. And in this particular play, Glass Menagerie, we have three major characters: Tom Wingfield, Amanda, his mother, and Laura Wingfield, his sister. Tom Wingfield is supposed to be the narrator and the central character of the play. He is a poet who is forced to work in a shoe factory to support his family, and his mother, Amanda, she has a very good memory of the past. She is nostalgic about the past, and she wants her daughter to be like her. But her daughter, fragile and slightly crippled, she looks at life in a very sad manner. She is melancholic often. She is depressed, and she was enrolled in a business college. But the very sight of a swarm of typewriters scares her, maybe because of her fear of mechanization and the impersonality of modern life, etc. etc. Amanda sells magazine subscriptions to supplement family income, but see, at the beginning of the play, we see Tom Wingfield, reciting a poem that is by Villon, Franco Villon, "Where are the snows of Asterias?" It talks about the sadness and melancholy of the good things that he once had. Amanda, 1930s, looks back to her girlhood in Blue Mountain, Mississippi, Both see their yesterdays as better times that they are now experiencing. Sort of talking about the magnificence of the past and sordidness of the present. So the legend, so that particular kind of attitude is there as far as these two characters are concerned. Son, the poet who is first to work hard, who and the mother who wants her girlhood or to be her youth to be restored, and the kind of fear that is there in Laura. All these things are there. There is, and Laura does not like attending the classes in the business college. She is afraid of, or she has a sort of and then we have when there is not only the mental attitude or the state of mind of the characters is represented through certain symbols, and what we see on the stage is the dramatist is not only trying to reflect reality as such, but he's going deeper into the mind of the characters and how they kind of look at life, etc., etc. And the legend Laura appears on the screen while Tom and Amanda are discussing her. In one particular scene, Amanda advises Laura to look very fresh, or to look pretty and things like that. And Laura is happy in what you call, in mounting glass animals. She that the very title itself is relevant. Glass Menagerie. She, rather than the human beings, or rather than the reality around her, what she finds refugees in the world of miniature animals, that animals that she creates, glass animals or sculptures or something like that. So that particular kind of a thing is there. Since the focus of the action is already on the symbolic little pieces of glass. So she finds happiness in little pieces of glass, and so that particular kind of a thing is there. There is, so the play is full of symbols, and he tries to find a suitor to her sister, and towards the end only he succeeds in finding Jim. Jim O'Connor. Jim O'Connor. She also had an affair with Jim once, and he somehow is able to kind of bring Jim to his house. So that is why Jim is another character of the play. He's an ordinary young man who worked with Tom at the shoe warehouse. In high school, he was very popular and wanted the boy most likely to succeed. But since then, he has not achieved all that he thinks he should have accomplished. He's the gentleman caller there. Manta and Laura have waited for a long time there, and their father, Mr. Wingfield, Tom, who he deserted the family. Mr. Wingfield, Tom's father, deserted the family to Amanda. He is the telephone man who fell in love with long distances. That is how he was described. The telephone man who fell in love with long distances. He is present in the play only in the form of a photograph over the mantle in Winfield's living room. So that is how this play goes. The action of the play consists of several events which relate to each other. Each event is understandable only in relation to the others. And most events in the play are outward events in which characters do things observable to the eye. Some are inward events also. For example, you have at dinner, there's a scene in which Amanda, the mother, lectures on table manners. She tells Laura to stay fresh for gentleman callers, and Amanda wants Laura to be very, presentable. Laura lives in a world of what do you call, her own interests. She does not want to come out of that world. She confines herself to that particular world, and she says that she does not expect any gentleman callers as such. And after some time, even after the lecture and all, after some days, to her shock, Amanda, the mother, finds that she has left the college. She has left the business college. She cannot tolerate, she cannot put up with the kind of rat race there, and she is happy with her own glass animals. So that particular kind of a thing, Amanda wants Laura to be worldly wise. She wants Laura to think about the way of the world, and she wants herself to be a conformist. But Laura does not want to be a conformist. She moves away from the path of the normal world, etc. So many things are there. And Laura had an affair with Jim. And she told Amanda that Jim was her suitor once. But all those things there, there is a confrontation between the mother and the son. At one point, Tom Wingfield calls Amanda a witch. And they kind of, they enter into a quarrel, and Amanda is very unhappy. She does not want to live with Tom. She says that he has to apologize. Only when Tom apologizes. So Tom brings a gentleman to the dinner, and he invited Jim for a party. Jim is his own colleague there. He is working with him in the shoe factory. And Laura, after seeing Jim, she's happy. She tries to talk to him, and she feels at home, and she gets back to the normal world and things like that. But later, after understanding that he's engaged, Laura again sinks into despair. And this particular kind of a thing is there. Laura could not again put up with the change situation. At once, she thought that she will be she will be getting a new kind of a life. But what happens is that there is all on a sudden everything changes. She goes back to plunges back to her own despair. And much of the play, you have the interaction, or it consists mainly of inward events, not only outward events. In the play we have inward events also. Much interaction is taking place in the play. Characters are always reacting to outward events, etc. The dreamy, nostalgic mood of the play is especially conducive to inward events. And you have to look at the kind of happenings in the play. And Laura's action consists almost entirely of inward events, we can say like that. We see her complete reliance on glass menagerie, and by the end of the play, Laura has engaged in very little outward action. And we see that her final withdrawal into her own private world is the result of her inability and unwillingness to find acceptance in the real world. Her inability to cope with the actual world, the world of reality. The world of reality is rather sordid. It doesn't provide her any succor. And while these things are going on, Tom is fired from the job. He loses his job, and he joins Merchant Marine. And in the final scene, we see final scene is a kind of a reverie, and Tom says that wherever he goes, Tom, Jim, etc., etc. In final scene, what happens is this particular kind of a thing. Wherever he goes, he remembers his sister and mother, and um, so in the final scene, we see that the light dims slightly and Tom appears before the audience as a narrator. While he's talking, Amanda and Laura are seen in the living room. While Tom is talking, Amanda and Laura are seen in the living room. While the scene between them is played in pantomime. The conclusion when Tom describes visit to Jim, etc. Amanda appears to be comforting her daughter who is huddled before her. Now that the mother's speech can't be heard and silliness is gone, etc. Laura lifts her grief-stricken face to Amanda and smiles. Her mother's speech has comforted her. Then Amanda, after looking briefly at father's portrait, exits from the room. Tom, who has been addressing the audience during this scene, says that he left home after being fired from the shoe factory for writing a poem on the lid of a shoebox. He has been fired because he has written a poem on the lid of a shoebox, and that since then he has been drifting from city to city. There is, and but he cannot escape from the memory of his family. The memory of his family always haunts him. So he remembers them. Wherever he goes, he is reminded of Laura. He cannot forget his sister. At the end of Tom's speech, Laura rises from the sofa in the living room, picks up the candelabrum and blows the candles out. We see the final retreat into the fantasy world, and she blows out the candle, and see, so that particular kind of a thing is there. The same between Laura and Jim Connor gives our first view of Laura as a person, but towards the end, we see Laura rapidly gains confidence, when she sees Jim, but she loses that. And after looking at the collection, that is Glass Menagerie, Jim proposes to Laura that they dance. He's still trying to build up her ego, etc. And after Jim makes his awkward confession about his engagement to Betty, Laura gives him the broken unicorn, etc. Hence the symbolism, broken unicorn is given to it. And we may see the broken unicorn as Laura's broken hops, broken hops of Laura. And it may represent her broken law hops for love and romance, and she gives the symbol of her love to Jim to take away with him, since he has broken her as well as her unicorn. Symbolically, he takes away the broken unicorn and the broken love also. That is how it is called, So this particular play, and as I have told you, this the setting is the physical background, and in the setting of the play, it has a symbolic setting, and the play moves on like that. Talking about the structure of the play, we can say that it's, instead of acts, the play is divided into parts. The first part consists of 5 scenes, and this first part is labeled "Preparations for a Gentleman Caller," and that is about the Amanda, the mother, trying to get some suitor to Laura, and Tom Wingfield, the poet, the dreamer, and the person who is trying to look after the family. They all are trying to find a suitor to Amanda. Not Amanda. I'm sorry, not Amanda. Amanda is the mother. To Laura. And part two consists of only 2 scenes. There is scene number 6 and scene number 7. It is called the Gentleman Caller. The Gentleman Caller comes. Jim comes. Jim comes and meets Laura, and they were one-time friends. But after seeing Jim, Laura is very happy, and Laura tries to kind of look at things in a very new manner. But what happens is that there is, when Jim says that he has already been engaged to Betty, things change. So this play is not a static play. This play has a lot of outward events, and outward events move rapidly. So, but at the same time, so much of inner action is also there. There is the dramatist turns his eye into the inner psyche of the characters. And we have Laura, typical character, whose reliance on Menagerie through timid action. She has lost all hopes, and she has tried to confine herself to the four walls of the house, and not only that, her glass menagerie that is symbolic, and the stage is often dim, and the stage is often dim, it's painted dim, and the dramatist uses a peculiar technique to, a symbolic setting is used, and the shafts of light are focused on selected areas of characters or actors, and this play has, it is said that the plot of Glass Menagerie is casual and tight also in a different sense. The events lead to an inevitable and satisfactory conclusion. The play opens with a scene in which Amanda speaks of a gentleman callers, and goes through the events leading to Laura's experience with Jim O'Connor, the gentleman caller, in the final scene. And it is said that, there is can it be called a well-made play? That's a different issue. But the play is also episodic in the sense that scenes are separate, distinct episodes. It cannot be called a well-made play in the traditional sense of the term. And although the episodes are complete in themselves, they do lead to the conclusion of the play. So it has a casual plot structure, and the exposition of the play begins with when Tom opens the scene in his role of a narrator. He gives the social background of the play. He talks about there is the sentimental nature and the dreamlike nature of life, etc. He himself is a poet, Tom Wingfield, and the development of the play begins when Tom takes his role as a character in the play. He is a narrator as well as a character. Through the action, we learn more about the characters and situation introduced in the exposition. So it is, as I told you, it's a series of episodes. There is several crises in the play. The first crisis comes when Amanda finds that Laura has not been attending business college, and the situation is drastically changed. Then Amanda must change her plans for Laura, etc. And Tom's desire to escape the drab life and heavy responsibilities. He cannot nurture his creative talents. He wants to help his family. He tries to cling on to a drab job, the job of a clerk in a shoe factory. So we have three complex characters in the play, and they could be described as what you call studies in frustration. It is even said like that. That is, they are studies in frustration. Tom, Laura, and even Manta is a different character, but there is, and they kind of suffer from a peculiar malady, that is a failure to communicate with each other. That is, failure of communication is a major problem as far as 20th century is concerned. And Tom talks for others. He is the one who talks for others. He tries to interpret the life of others and all. So, but yeah, things like that. All the action of Glass Menagerie revolves around Laura, but she does nothing to further the action of the play. And she's tender, moth-like girl who cannot cope with the harsh world. Laura had to drop out of high school, etc., because she failed her tests and was too shy to take them again. And uh, Laura is extremely naive. She believes the wild story Tom tells her when he comes drunk, etc. Comes in. She is fragile and beautiful, etc. The last scene, Laura overcomes her shyness with the help from Jim, but she goes back to, she never emerges as a character in her own right. We know little about her except through stage directions and the speeches of other characters, and her dependence on fragile, unearthly. In the stage direction, Tennessee Williams says, about Laura, a fragile, unearthly prettiness has come out in Laura. She's like a piece of translucent glass. She's like a piece of translucent glass touched by light. And at first, Laura is too shy even to open the door after she has learned that this gentleman caller is the Jim from her high school days, etc. So that way, the play develops like that. Laura, whenever she's frustrated, she rushes to have stand-up glass sculptures. That is the menagerie. That is the symbolism of the play. Glass menagerie, glass sculptures. Or the old phonograph that was left behind by her father. So that way, there is. Laura is the girl in glass whose world is infinitely more beautiful than the real one. She is overtly shy, and this shyness is even more striking in contrast to Amanda's forcefulness. Her role in the play is central. All the characters revolve around her, and her destruction, her final retreat into a make-believe world, a fantasy, a world of fantasy, is indeed touching. It is indeed touching as far as the play is concerned. There is so. And there are several themes in the play, that have already been discussed, and it is an abstract play, and there is not abstraction is very much part of one very much part of Tennessee Williams, and the illusion versus reality is one particular theme. The need for communication is another theme. The destruction of beauty is another theme, etc. The role of the poet, and we come across several other themes also. The role of the poet, the American dream, the impersonality of modern world, the clash of cultures and generations, and also the playwright stresses on the need for meaningful human relationships. That's all about the play Glass Menagerie. Thank you. Let's now move on to Leroy Jones, the third playwright in the syllabus. Leroy Jones was born in 1934 and died in 2014. He was a major Afro-American playwright. He was also known as Imamu Amiri Baraka after his conversion. He had thrown away his Christian name and he accepted a different traditional name, Imamu Amiri Baraka. He was a poet, dramatist, essayist, and writer of fiction. He taught at several universities. He was well known for his strident social criticism. He was a committed playwright in the sense that he tried to express the problems of Afro Americans, how they were marginalized and how they were oppressed, how they were tortured, and he used a kind of an incendiary style to shock and awaken audiences to the political concerns of the Afro Americans. And in 1965, he founded Black Arts Repertory, a particular movement for propagating the black art, the black aesthetics. Black is beautiful, the black is powerful. That kind of a thing, came out. It emerged largely in Europe and America, and he was trying to give expression to the problems of the Black Americans, Afro Americans. He wrote poetry and he wrote short stories and he wrote novels also, and he explores clearly the themes of racism and racial oppression, the black man's identity, and his plays like Dutchman and Slave are very important, very significant. And this particular play, Dutchman, it was published in 1964. It's a one-act play, and it was debuted off in Broadway, and it is a social play. It's a play which has social ramifications. It's part of the civil rights movement. And in the play we have two characters, two major characters. Clay, the titular, the central character of the play. Clay is 20-year-old Afro-American, and he is an intellectual. He is a person who reads much, writes much, and all. And we have another character called Lula, a 30-year-old white woman, and they meet on a subway train. That is, and when the play opens, we see Clay wearing a suit and tie, and he gets into a train, subway train, and in a New York station, and Clay is sitting on the subway, reading and looking idly out of the window, and he sees Lula straight. He sees Lula staring at him, and when he looks idly out of the window, and Lula also boards in the train, and she sits next to Clay, and Clay welcomes her, and he smiles at her, and they become friends, and they start talking and even flirting, and Lula offers him an apple, and they talk many things, and eventually the scene changes. Lula becomes what do you call, Lula becomes intolerant, and she starts expressing some racial comments, and racism, as we know, is a refusal to acknowledge others. It's an othering process. It's a kind of a marginalizing process, and she even flirts and racially taunts him. And when things go beyond tolerance, Clay slaps her, and he sheds his buttoned up exterior, and his pent up feelings are expressed in a long speech, a kind of a harangue, and he speaks. And the thing is that, that is, she often asks him, what right do you have to wear a tie and button suit and all, and and she even tells him that, your grandfather was a slave, you didn't go to Harvard, what right do you have to read books, do you have to write, etc., you are free of your own history, something like that, how. And the thing is that she says that blacks are inferior to whites, blacks are intellectually inferior to whites, they may be physically strong, and they can be used for such purposes, but intellectually speaking, culturally speaking, they are inferior to whites. So they have to be servile, or rather they have to show their respect to the whites, etc., etc. So this kind of an intolerance, racism, is something which is biological or cultural or something like that, and she forgets the fact that it's a social construct. So it's in this particular, and after the speech, Claire goes to leave the train, and she even asks others to throw him out of the train, etc., etc. After the speech, Clay goes to leave the train. As he reaches over Lula to get his belongings, she stabs him in the chest, with a knife. She stabs him in the chest with a knife, and she orders the train passengers to throw him away, etc., etc. That kind of a thing go off until and this kind of a harangue goes on until another black man enters into the train. He gets into the train, and he also looks intellectual and things like that. So uh, and this particular play shows how difficult it is to become a man in the US, or rather to live in America. And even black men's identity is questioned. Black men is only to please the white women or something like that. That kind of a feeling also comes up in the play, and so it explores clearly the themes of racial oppression and black male identity, and so even Amiri Baraka once said that there is no justice in America, but it is the fight for justice that sustains. So this play also clearly tries to address these issues. This play actually addresses the concerns of the Black Americans and the kind of justice that is there, and she slaps at him, and she tries to uh, raise feelings against him and things like that. So but these issues are discussed in the play. So, and according to Leroy Jones, according to Imamo Emery Baraka, artist's role is to raise the consciousness of the people, to make them understand life, the world, and themselves more completely. And he even said that in on one occasion, he even said that from the slave ship to the citizenship, we faced a lot of difficulties or something like that, a lot of issues, a lot of struggles. A lot of struggles have been undertaken by the blacks to assert their identity, their individuality. Harlem Renaissance, a new awakening art was seen, and he was also Leroy Jones was also part of the Harlem movement, and his interventions in drama and other art forms have been very effective, have been very significant, and he tried to redefine the very concept of what you call black arts, and the very concept of art as such. Art is meaningless unless it unless it addresses the issues of the oppressed, or rather issues of the underdogs. So something like that. So racism is a social construct. It is not something biological. It's a willful refusal to acknowledge others, to to realize that others are also there in society, and human beings are all equal and things like that. This kind of notion of difference, or rather the othering process, has been there all through in America, not only in America but in Europe and in other countries also. So this has been highlighted by Leroy Jones in his literary works. Thank you.